I can't
When he
believe
called
this is
me too old
happening.
for adventure, I
We'll discuss
believed
this
him until
later.
he packed his bags for Italy with his secretary. That's when I stopped believing and started acting. My name is Clara. I've been called many things in my life: mother, friend, neighbor, volunteer at the church, but for most of my adult years, I was simply his wife. That was the role I wore most proudly, until it became a weight that dragged me down. Before I go on, I want to ask something of you. Where are you watching from today? I love picturing the towns, the kitchens, the cozy chairs where people like you sit and hear my story. It makes me feel less alone in all this. When I first married him, I thought I had won the lottery. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who walked into a room and made people turn their heads. I was quieter, steadier, always the one to remember birthdays and make sure the bills got paid. It seemed like a balance. His fire, my calm. For years, we built a life that looked perfect from the outside. But time reveals things youthful hope covers up. He loved admiration more than he loved intimacy. While I found joy in little rituals, planting tulips in spring, hosting dinners, traveling to see our grandchildren, he thrived on being noticed, praised, admired by others. When we were young, it didn't matter as much. But as we grew older, I began to feel him pulling away, as though my aging face no longer fed his ego. The first real sting came at a family dinner. I had just been talking about a trip I'd always dreamed of: Italy, the canals of Venice, the vineyards of Tuscany, the art in Florence. I could almost taste the olive oil and wine, and I wanted him there beside me. He leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said loudly enough for the table to hear, "Italy's not for the old. Besides, you'd just slow me down." The laughter around the table was polite, but my heart cracked a little. I brushed it off with a smile. That night, I cried quietly in the bathroom so no one would see. I told myself he was just teasing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a joke. It was how he saw me now: slower, less exciting, someone whose world should shrink to the size of our living room. After that, comments like that became more frequent. "You don't need to buy that dress. Who are you trying to impress?" Or, "Why don't you just let the younger folks handle that?" Or, "Travel is for people with energy, not bad knees." I didn't argue. I had grown used to smoothing things over, to making peace rather than making noise. Still, there were moments when his behavior raised my suspicions. He had a secretary, a woman maybe half my age, who seemed to orbit around him with constant energy. I noticed how he lit up in her presence in ways he no longer did with me. The way his phone seemed glued to his hand, the texts he brushed off as work. But I wanted to believe the best. After all, hadn't we been through so much together? Children, mortgages, illnesses, family crises. Surely that meant something. The gap between us only grew wider. He stayed later at the office, came home restless, critical, impatient. I began to feel invisible. I was there cooking meals, keeping the home, holding the threads of our life together. And yet, it was as though I had faded into wallpaper. Despite all this, a part of me kept dreaming of that trip. I'd sit with travel magazines, run my fingers over photos of ancient ruins and blue coastlines, whispering to myself, one day, I thought maybe if I could get him there, if we could just go, we might find each other again. That dream would soon become the turning point of my life. Not because he agreed to go with me, but because of how cruelly he refused. That refusal, I later realized, was the spark that lit everything else on fire. By then, I didn't yet know about Italy. I didn't yet know the full truth about him and his secretary. But the ground beneath our marriage was already shaking, and I was standing on it with my eyes closed, pretending not to feel the tremors. The day I learned the truth about Italy, the world seemed to tilt. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a few words overheard, almost carelessly dropped, but it was enough to unravel years of denial. It was a Tuesday, the sort of day when nothing remarkable is supposed to happen. I was tidying the kitchen, folding laundry, doing the 1,000 small things that keep a household running. He walked in with that brisk step he used when he wanted to appear busy and important. He barely looked at me, muttering about schedules and deadlines. Then he said it. "I'll be out of town for 2 weeks. Italy, meetings, don't wait up. Italy." The word hit me like a blow. My Italy. The one dream I had clung to, the place I had begged him to visit with me. He said it like it was nothing, as ordinary as a trip to the grocery store. I tried to steady my voice. Italy? Since when are you going to Italy? He waved his hand dismissively. Work. You wouldn't enjoy it. Too much walking. Too much noise. You'd get tired. I stood there, dish towel in my hand, staring at him. His words didn't sting like a tease anymore. They cut like a knife. He didn't even attempt kindness. It wasn't about protecting me or sparing me. It was about removing me from the picture. For the first time, I didn't swallow my feelings. You always told me travel wasn't practical. You said we couldn't afford it, that it was frivolous. Now suddenly, it's work? He gave me that look, the one that said the conversation was already over. I don't need to explain everything to you. I have responsibilities. That word responsibilities rattled around in my mind for hours. Later that evening, when he stepped out to take a call, I overheard the soft, too friendly tone in his voice. Not the clipped way he usually spoke to colleagues, but smooth, light, playful. He said her name, his secretary's. I sank into the chair, cold spreading through me. There it was, laid bare. He wasn't just going on a business trip, he was going with her. And not only had he denied me the dream I had held on to for decades, but he had stolen it for himself with someone else. That night, I didn't cry. Oddly enough, tears didn't come. Instead, a stillness settled over me like a pond when the wind suddenly stops. Anger was there, yes, but beneath it was something even stronger. Clarity. In the days that followed, I watched him with new eyes. The careful grooming before work, the sudden gym membership, the way he scrolled through his phone late at night with a faint smile. I realized I had been living with a stranger for longer than I cared to admit. Still, a part of me wanted to scream, to accuse, to demand explanations. But what good would that do? He had already made his choice. I could see it in his body, hear it in his tone. His mind was already in Italy on cobblestone streets with her by his side. One evening, my neighbor, an old friend who had seen more than I thought, caught me on the porch. "You look tired," she said gently. "Is everything all right?" For once, I didn't plaster on the usual smile. I just shook my head, and she, bless her heart, reached out and squeezed my hand. "Don't let him make you small. You've got more strength than you know." Her words stuck with me. Maybe it was because she'd known me before the marriage, before the years of shrinking myself to fit into his world. Maybe it was because she said it without pity, just fact, plain and simple. That night, while he was asleep, I sat in the quiet of the living room. I stared at the travel magazines I'd kept tucked away, the ones filled with dog-eared pages and deferred dreams. For years I had begged him to see me, to share in my hopes. And here he was, about to live them out with another woman. The betrayal burned, but underneath it, something began to stir. It wasn't just rage at him. It was a fire for myself, a whisper that said, "You are not powerless. You are not done." I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. When he returned from Italy, he would not be coming home to the same woman he left behind. Once the shock of betrayal settled, I discovered something surprising. Beneath the anger, beneath the humiliation, there was a strange calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing after him, trying to please him, waiting for crumbs of affection. No, my mind was clear, my focus sharp. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a pen and a pad of paper, almost like a student again. I made a list, not of groceries, not of chores, but of leverage. Everything we owned, everything we had built together, and more importantly, everything he valued. It wasn't a long list, but it was powerful. His car, our joint accounts, the house deed, the pension we both contributed to. For decades, I had treated those things as ours. Now, I looked at them as rightfully mine. I had poured my life into this marriage, my energy, my health, my youth. I raised the children, managed the home, supported his career. I had invested everything, and now, finally, I was ready to withdraw. The first target was his car. Oh, that car. It wasn't just metal and wheels to him. It was his pride, his proof that he was still young and desirable. A sleek, polished machine he babied more than he ever babied me. He waxed it on weekends, bragged about it to friends, insisted it was an investment. I decided that would be the first thing to go. I called a dealer I trusted. He came by 2 days later, looked the car over, and named a fair price. I didn't haggle. I just handed over the keys, signed the papers, and watched as he drove it away. For a moment, I thought my knees would buckle. But then, as the taillights disappeared, I felt something unexpected: freedom. It was as if chains had fallen off my wrists. Next came the accounts. I visited the bank in a simple cardigan, carrying my tote bag like it was any other errand. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, recognized my name on the joint account. "Would you like to make a withdrawal?" she asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "All of it?" She blinked, surprised. "All of it," I repeated, my voice steady. When I walked out of that bank, a cashier's check tucked safely in my bag, I felt taller. He had always assumed I wouldn't touch the money, that I was too timid, too dependent. But every dollar in that account was as much mine as his, and I wasn't about to leave it sitting there, waiting for him and his secretary to sip champagne with. The final step was the lawyer. I made the appointment quietly, slipping out one morning while he thought I was at the grocery store. The lawyer was a seasoned woman, perhaps a few years younger than me, with sharp eyes and a reassuring voice. I laid it all out: the years of belittlement, the trip to Italy, the secretary, the accounts, the car. She didn't flinch. She nodded and said, "You've already done the hardest part, deciding you're done. The rest is just paperwork." Hearing that was like a balm. For so long I had felt trapped, as though the marriage was an unmovable wall, but now, piece by piece, I was leveling it. I filed the papers that day. Divorce, a word I had once feared. Now it tasted like liberation. Back at home, I carried on as if nothing had changed. I cooked, I cleaned, I smiled politely when neighbors waved. But inside, I was a storm. Every action I took was deliberate, every step laying the groundwork for the moment he returned. I imagined the scene, often him walking through the door, expecting me to be waiting, docile and forgiving. Instead, he'd find his car gone, his accounts emptied, his wife no longer at his side but standing tall with divorce papers in hand. The image carried me through those days. Oddly, I wasn't consumed by bitterness. Don't mistake me, I was angry. But the anger wasn't a wildfire anymore. It was a steady flame, controlled, purposeful. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, not for him. Each night, as I lay in bed alone, I whispered to myself, "He thinks he's in control. Let him. When he comes back, he'll see." And so, while he strolled through piazzas and dined on fine wine with his secretary, I was here quietly rewriting the ending of our story. He believed I would be waiting, older, smaller, grateful for whatever scraps he brought back. Instead, I was preparing to stand taller than I ever had in my life. The betrayal had given me something unexpected: permission. Permission to finally stop living in his shadow and claim the life that was always mine to begin with. While he was off chasing sunsets in Rome and whispering to his secretary under Tuscan skies, I lived a very different Italy right here at home. Mine didn't come with gondolas or piazzas, but it tasted just as sweet because it was my own. The first morning after he left, I brewed a pot of coffee just for myself. No scrambling to make his eggs just so. No rushing to iron his shirts before work. I sat by the window with my steaming mug and let the silence wash over me. Funny thing, what used to feel lonely now felt peaceful. I could hear birdsong instead of criticism, the hum of the fridge instead of his sighs. I started to reclaim my days, small steps at first. I joined a painting class at the community center. For years, I had told myself I was too busy or too old to start something new. But when I picked up that brush and laid color across canvas, I felt 10 years younger. The teacher, a cheerful man with paint on his shoes, looked at my first attempt and said, "You've got an eye for this." No one had complimented me like that in a long time. Not about appearance, not about usefulness, but about me, my talent. Another afternoon, I went on a day trip with a few friends to a little coastal town a couple of hours away. We wandered the boardwalk, ate fried clams, and laughed until our cheeks hurt. For the first time in years, I wasn't glancing at the clock, worrying about being home before he noticed my absence. Freedom, I discovered, didn't need a passport. I also began tending the garden with new energy. That small patch of earth behind our house became my Tuscany. I planted tomatoes, basil, and lavender, digging into the soil with bare hands. I imagined myself in Italy, walking through vineyards, and realized I could create beauty right here. Every green sprout that pushed through the dirt felt like a personal victory, proof that growth is always possible, no matter the season of life. Meanwhile, he called a few times from overseas. The first time, his tone was rushed, distracted. "Everything fine back home?" he asked, as though I were just a caretaker for the house, not his partner of decades. "Everything is fine," I answered, simply leaving out the details of cars sold and accounts emptied. He didn't notice the edge in my voice. He was too busy describing how busy he was with meetings. On another call, I heard her laughter in the background. He tried to cover the phone, but it was too late. My heart didn't break, this time it hardened. If he was flaunting her presence so openly, then he truly believed I was blind, naive, too weak to do anything but wait. The irony was almost funny. He thought I was powerless, while I was already building a new life without him. One evening, I went to the lawyer's office again to finalize some documents. Walking into that office felt like stepping into my future. I wasn't just reacting to his betrayal anymore, I was actively shaping what came next. Divorce papers signed, financial matters underway. Each signature was like a declaration, I am not invisible. I also reconnected with my sister, whom I hadn't visited in years because he always complained she talked too much. We sat on her porch, drinking iced tea, and for hours I poured out everything I had held inside. She listened. She hugged me. Then she laughed softly. "You've got more fight in you than he ever gave you credit for," she said. That became a theme, really rediscovering the fight, the spark, the woman I used to be before I bent myself into the shape he wanted. I realized how many dreams I had quietly shelved, books I wanted to read, places nearby I had never explored, friendships I had let go of. While he posed in front of fountains with his secretary, I was learning to stand in front of mirrors again, looking at myself not with criticism, but with compassion. Wrinkles, silver hair, all of it, I earned them. They told a story of survival, of years lived, of strength. I was not too old for anything. If anything, I was finally the right age to stop caring about his judgments and start living on my own terms. The days passed quickly, and with each one, I grew lighter. The betrayal still burned, yes, but it also gave me a strange gift. Space. Space to remember who I was. Space to breathe. Space to imagine. I thought often of his return. I pictured him walking into the house, smug from his little adventure, expecting me to be waiting with open arms. The idea made me smile, not because I longed for confrontation, but because I knew the surprise waiting for him would be sweeter than any Italian wine. And so, while he traveled Italy with another woman, I traveled back to myself. My journey was quieter, but it was far more meaningful because Italy without me wasn't the tragedy he thought it was. Italy without me was the beginning of my freedom. The day of his return felt like the final act of a long play. I had rehearsed the scene in my head so many times that when it finally came, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I heard the taxi pull up outside, the crunch of tires on gravel. My heart didn't race the way it once did when he came home from business trips, no flutter of excitement, no eager anticipation, just a calm certainty, like a storm finally breaking. The front door swung open, and there he was, suitcase in hand, tanned from Mediterranean sun, smelling faintly of a cologne I didn't recognize. He had that swagger about him, the look of a man who thought he was returning to a life neatly waiting, preserved just as he left it. "Well," he said, dropping his bags in the hallway. "Home sweet home." I studied him quietly. The smile on his face, the arrogance in his voice, almost laughable. He thought he had pulled off the perfect lie, the perfect escape. But his eyes faltered when he glanced out the window and noticed the driveway. Empty. "Where's the car?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Sold," I said, calm as stone. He blinked. "You what?" "I sold it," I repeated, folding my hands on the table. "It's gone." His face reddened. That car was worth. It was worth exactly what I got for it. I interrupted, my voice steady. "And that money is mine now, just like the accounts, just like my time, my energy, my future." He froze, stunned. It took a moment for the weight of my words to land. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. "You can't do this. I won't allow it." That was the moment I laughed, not cruelly, but genuinely, liberatingly. "You won't allow it. That's the problem right there," I said. "You've spent decades thinking I needed your permission. I don't. Not anymore. The papers are filed. The lawyers are handling it. You don't get to allow or forbid anything in my life again." He staggered back as though the words themselves had weight. For a long time, he just stared at me, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then came the rage. "You ungrateful bitter." "Stop," I said firmly, raising a hand. My voice didn't shake. "For years I swallowed your insults, your dismissive remarks, your endless belittling. I let you shrink me down until I barely recognized myself. But I'm done. I'm not too old. I'm not too weak. I'm not too small. I am done." Silence fell. For the first time in our marriage, I had the last word, and he knew it. He muttered about lawyers and how he'd fight me, about how I'd regret this, but there was no fire in it. His bluff had been called. He had no cards left. Finally, he grabbed his suitcase and stormed for the door. "You'll be nothing without me," he spat. I stood tall, hands steady at my sides. "On the contrary," I said softly, "without you, I am finally something." The door slammed behind him. Just like that, the weight lifted. For the first time in decades, my house wasn't filled with his presence, his criticisms, his demands. It was filled with quiet, and that quiet was mine. I sat back down at the kitchen table, the very spot where I had once cried over his cruel jokes about my age. Now the tears didn't come only peace. The reckoning was over. He had expected a wife who would wait and forgive and crumble. Instead, he came home to find a woman he never truly knew, a woman who had finally remembered her own strength. After he left, I half expected the old ache to return, the fear of being alone, the sting of rejection, the endless questions of, what now? But instead, I found relief. For the first time in decades, my house belonged to me. No heavy footsteps pacing the halls, no sharp sighs at dinner, no judgment lurking in the air, just glorious open space. I filled it with the things I had once tucked away, music I loved, photographs of family he never wanted displayed, even lavender-scented candles he claimed gave him headaches. Each small choice was an act of reclamation. I didn't leap into wild adventures right away. My rebirth was gentler, steadier, like spring unfolding after a hard winter. I woke each morning with purpose. Some days I tended the garden, watching basil and tomatoes thrive as though they, too, knew the house was lighter. Other days I painted not for praise, not for approval, but because the colors made me feel alive. One particularly bright afternoon, I booked a small trip of my own, not to Italy, not yet, but to a quiet bed and breakfast by the mountains. The woman who ran it welcomed me with warmth. I spent my days walking trails, breathing in pine air, and writing in a journal. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every step reminded me the world hadn't closed its doors to me, no matter what he once said about being too old. I reconnected with friends I'd lost along the way. Old companions who had grown tired of his arrogance welcomed me back with open arms. We had lunches that stretched into afternoons, laughing over memories and making new ones. My sister visited more often, filling the house with chatter and comfort. Even neighbors noticed the shift. "You look different," one said kindly. "Happier." I was not happier because revenge had satisfied me, though I admit it felt good to see his smugness crumble, but because my joy came from something deeper, realizing I had survived, and more than that, I had grown. Of course, there were moments of loneliness, nights when I missed the sound of another voice, mornings when I longed for companionship. But even those moments were lighter than the constant weight of living with someone who made me feel small. Solitude, I learned, is not the same as emptiness. Sometimes solitude is freedom. I heard about him in whispers and gossip. His secretary didn't stick around once she realized his charm was a thin veneer over control. He lost more than money in the divorce. He lost his image, his standing. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Life has a way of catching up to people like him. What mattered was not his downfall, but my rise. One evening, sitting on my porch as the sun dipped low, I thought of Italy again, not with bitterness, not with longing, but with a quiet smile. I realized I didn't need Italy to prove anything. If I wanted to go one day, I would, but even if I never set foot in Venice or Tuscany, I had already found something more important, myself. And to you listening right now, maybe in your living room, maybe in your kitchen, maybe alone in your car, I want to say this. Don't let anyone tell you you're too old to live, to dream, to begin again. Age isn't a cage. It can be a key if you choose to use it. I had spent too many years letting someone else define my worth. But when he walked away, I finally remembered something I should have known all along. I was never too old. I was timeless. So here I am telling you my story, not as a victim, not as a bitter ex-wife, but as a woman reborn. My husband went to Italy with his secretary. I stayed home, sold his car, emptied our accounts, and filed for divorce. When he returned, he found nothing waiting for him, no car, no money, no obedient wife. Though he thought Italy would be his triumph, it turned out to be mine. Italy without me was just a trip. Italy without him was the beginning of my freedom. Before I end, I'll ask again, where are you watching from? I like to imagine this story traveling farther than he ever did, reaching more people than his charm ever could. And maybe, just maybe, it will inspire someone to realize that it's never too late to choose yourself. Before I go on, I want to ask something of you. Where are you watching from today? I love picturing the towns, the kitchens, the cozy chairs where people like you sit and hear my story. It makes me feel less alone in all this.